Guys, 14-game main slate coming your way this evening. So how about we break it down and get some of your favorite plays? Okay, let's do it. Starting with a pitcher over 8K that you want in your lineup. So Matt, Corbin Burns is the priciest guy at 10K, but he's facing some hot San Francisco bats. So you want to look elsewhere, maybe save some cash with a guy who's still over 8K?
I think so. Yeah, that probably is where I'm looking. And honestly, I think this is another slate to maybe look below that 8K benchmark and play some cheaper pitchers. But if I'm paying up, I think Adam Wainwright is my favorite of these expensive pitchers because Corbin Burns is just going to get a lot of ownership. And it probably is somewhat justified. He is the best pitcher on the slate, I think, by a significant margin, but he's facing a Giants lineup that is pretty good and also just got a lot healthier. Brandon Belt returned to the lineup yesterday. Tommy La Stella returned a couple days ago. He's not the best hitter, but he's a guy who doesn't strike out that much, and he's batting from the left side of the plate, so platoon advantage against Burns. It's mostly that the Giants just aren't a lineup that figures to be a strikeout-heavy lineup. Buster Posey doesn't strike out a lot. Chris Bryant's on the team now. La Stella's not a big strikeout guy. Lamont Wade doesn't strike out much. So I just don't think the strikeout median is really there. There's still upside because it's Corbin Burns and he could have a big strikeout game anywhere. But Wainwright is facing the Royals, who just traded Jorge Soler. Andrew Benintendi has been dealing with an injury, and they're moving from the American League to a National League game where they have to have the pitcher bat. Maybe Sal Perez gets the night off. I think that would be a huge bonus for Wainwright because they don't have a DH available. So the matchup is just really good, and I think the ownership will be a lot lower than both Burns and Chris Bassett.
Paul, you think Burns is going to have a lot of ownership? Is it a little too chalky for you, so you want to look elsewhere?
I agree, and I love the call on Wainwright. These matchups where AL teams forego the DH and as visitors is a real disadvantage for them as they go to NL parks, removing that productive bat, and it just messes with their strategy that they employ for over 150 of the other games in the year. Aside from that, Wainwright has been rock solid in his last 10 outings, posting a 5-1 mark, backed by 51 strikeouts in 53 innings, only 43 hits along the way there, a whip of 106. That's amazing numbers across the board. And he faces the second worst offense in the AL tonight. Also on my mind are two other guys. Kyle Muller of the Braves has impressed me in his 7 appearances so far, limiting all comers. The total of only 19 hits allowed in 29 and 2/3 inning pitched, along with 33 strikeouts and only 1 homer. So he'll only cost $9,200, and I think that might stretch him out. He might go beyond his usual 5 innings per start tonight. I also finally like the Rays' Kyle Yarbrough I think it's a chalky matchup myself against the lowly Orioles. He's only $8,100 and might be the most attractive pitcher on the slate for me, averaging almost 6 innings per start in his last 10 appearances, limiting opponents to that 1.16 whip, and enjoying a decided edge in head-to-head action against the current O's batters over their careers with a 260 on-base percentage allowed in 113 at-bats.
All right, Erik, what do you think? Where are you going for a guy who's over 8K?
Yeah, I think my top option here is a guy that Paul touched on, in Kyle Muller. And it's not because I'm a huge Kyle Muller fan. He's shown enough that I'm willing to pay $9,200 for him. The main reason is facing the Nationals. I played a game with a friend the other day called Name a National. You're going to run out of guys pretty quickly after that trade deadline. Juan Soto, battling a knee injury. He seemed to suffer something late in his last game. If he's not in there, who is the best Nationals hitter? Is it Josh Bell, who has a WRC plus of 107 and is worse against lefties for his career? Is it Yadiel Hernandez? He's a 33-year-old who's only had 154 MLB plate appearances, been slightly above average, but he's also a lefty. There is just not much left at all in Washington right now. So anybody who's anybody is interesting against the Nationals down the stretch, and Muller has enough there. He's not as good as his 243 ERA so far. Been helped by a lot of luck factors, 250 BABIP. He's stranding over 80% of base runners. But that 27% strikeout rate is a clear strength. It's something he showed in the minors. He was striking out nearly 31% of batters in 9 AAA starts. Walks too many guys, doesn't keep the ball on the ground well, but that strikeout rate gives him the chance for a high upside at any given day. And man, the floor of anybody against the Nationals is going to be quite high these last couple months.
All right, let's talk about hitters now. Paul, we're looking for a guy who is over 5K. You got Jose Ramirez at 6,400, Vlad Guerrero Jr. at 6,500. The top 2 priciest guys, do you want them in your lineup, or are you going to pay down a little?
I'm going to go a titch lower and take Mookie Betts, certainly pricey as well at $6,100, but he's on fire with it. 19 hits in his last 40 at bats. punctuated by 6 homers and 10 extra base hits. So a power bat that's going well, give it to me every time. He'll get the platoon advantage also against a lefty starter for the Angels, although he's a good one. I like Rafael Devers visiting the Rogers Center tonight. He enjoys the platoon advantage against Alex Manoah and enters this game on his own 13 for 40 tear. He only cost $5,700. And then finally, Manny Machado also has appeal for me tonight because of his current hot streak, 15 hits in his last 39 at bats. He has 4 homers and 6 extra base hits amongst that sample. His price tag is $5,600. And he too will enjoy the platoon advantage against Caleb Smith. The guy's having trouble keeping the ball in the park. 11 home runs in his last 47 and 2/3 innings pitched.
Erik, what about you? Where are you looking for a hitter who's over 5K? Are you paying all the way up for a guy who's over 6K, or are you going to save some money in the 5s?
Yeah, I'm going to go with Manny Machado, who Paul just touched on there. Main reason is that he's going against Caleb Smith, who will get the platoon advantage against. Smith was a guy that I think fantasy people liked for a few years, a little while back when he did strike out a fair number of guys. And the thought was always, man, if he just could do anything else, he'd be quite an interesting fantasy pitcher. I think we know by now that he doesn't do anything else. And his strikeout rate isn't even that high, 26% this year, to go along with a 12.4% walk rate and a ground ball rate below 30%. And in his 5 seasons, he's never had a ground ball rate that's even touched 30%. Normally we talk about guys even in the mid-30s as quite low for ground ball rate. He is, a clear outlier there. I believe it's only Marco Estrada since he started his career that has a lower ground ball rate than him. So plenty of potential for somebody to hit one out the park against him, even in San Diego, where it's not the most hitter-friendly park in the world. So a guy like Machado, who's hit 364 with 5 homers in 17 games so far in the second half. I wish he had Fernando Tatis hitting around him to increase his run and RBI totals, but there's plenty of talent still in that Padres lineup, and I'm interested in anyone who can hit it out of the park against a guy like Caleb Smith.
So, Matt, you said this was maybe a slate you wanted to pay down at pitcher and get some big bats. So who are you going with?
I think there's a lot of good choices that are in that 6K range, but I'm actually looking to Joey Gallo, who has a lefty-lefty matchup. And he was my favorite player on last night's slate and did well. The problem was the rest of the Yankees were bad. So having Gallo with 4 other Yankees wasn't actually that productive. But his 30 fantasy points with 2 doubles and a home run against Tyler Anderson and the Mariners bullpen, I think could be replicated here in another very similar matchup against Marco Gonzalez. And Joey Gallo actually is a better power hitter slightly against lefties than he is against righties, even though he is left-handed. So his career numbers, he's a little bit worse for batting average standpoint and on-base percentage against lefties, but his power numbers, his ISO, his WRC plus actually, so his overall hitting package is better against lefties. And his ownership is just going to be really, really low because you generally don't see chalky players when they're facing same-handed pitchers unless there's some pricing disparity or something else that stands out that makes them appear as a good play. I like the Yankees in general at home in a spot where I think they'll be lower owned than a lot of other high upside teams. But Gallo in particular, because he's facing a lefty, I think people will just go to Aaron Judge and Giancarlo Stanton if they're using a Yankees outfielder. Gallo gets overlooked, and I think the matchup is just as good for him as it is for those guys. So that's where I'm looking to pay up. He's only 5K, so it's cheaper than players I'm normally talking about. He's right on the button at 5,000, but I think he's a really strong play for tonight.
All right, well, we just talked about guys who are a little bit more pricey, but let's save the people some money here, okay? So, Erik, give us the best DFS value bat for the slate.
Yeah, I'm going to save people as much money as they possibly can and go all the way down to the 2,000 line and talk about Joe Adell. I think there's often these guys who are talented young players right after they debut seem to sit around that 2,000 mark for a few games, and Adell is still down there. He certainly is a talented player. He was a top 10 prospect before he debuted last year, and it was admittedly a terrible debut. 478 OPS in 38 games, striking out over 40% of the time. Pretty much nothing good you could say about his season last year, but there was no real reason to believe he was ready. He wasn't good at AAA level the year prior. This year, though, in 73 AAA games, he has 23 homers while hitting 289, also 8 steals, so he could chip in a bit there. Still striking out close to 30% of the time at the AAA level is a worry. But, at least it's not 41.7% like he was at his MLB debut. He's looked good in a tiny sample of 3 MLB games, 4 for 12 with just 2 strikeouts. Not going to overreact to that at all, but hey, at least he's not striking out 7 times in 12 at-bats like we might have expected last year. again, it really does not take much to justify a guy with his talent at the minimum price. He's hit 5th in the last 2 games. That's a good enough lineup spot for me. He'll get the platoon advantage against David Price, who is good, but this is nowhere near peak David Price. And again, $2,000 doesn't have to take much at all to justify a guy at that price. And he's easily, I think, the most talented player you'll find at that line, even if he doesn't have the resume.
Well, Matt, Erik just gave us some serious savings. Let's get some from you too.
So I don't know if I'm going quite that cheap. And there's a spot here that I'm pretty torn on in Coors Field, where I think German Marquez might actually contend for the most popular pitcher on the slate, maybe next to Corbin Burns. We actually saw John Gray in a similar matchup a couple of days ago pick up 25% ownership in tournaments. And he had pretty good results, I think around 15 fantasy points. But it doesn't seem like the field is shying away from playing pitchers at Coors. So this could be a situation where Marquez is pretty popular and maybe the Marlins come in a bit lower owned than you would expect from a team that's at Coors Field with prices this low, like Jesus Aguilar, 3,700, Jazz Chisholm is 4K. And then there's some other hitters in the 2000s that aren't as good, but this spot just might not be that interesting to a lot of people because I think Marquez, like that side of the game, will just be more appealing. And you need some savings because this isn't a slate with a standout cheap pitcher option. There are some guys to pay up for. Even Wainwright, who is cheaper than Burns and Bassett, is still 9,500. So if you're paying up for an expensive stack, you need a couple of hitters that are cheaper. And I think the Marlins are the spot to maybe play 2 or 3 hitters against Marquez and get some leverage there against someone who I think will be a surprisingly popular pitcher for this slate.
Paul, where are you looking for a value bat for the slate?
I'm going to give you 3 guys who are priced in the lower range here that you've identified and try to make good reasons for all of them. The Red Sox visit the Jays tonight in a critical 3-game set. And I see Kike Hernandez coming to town on a 12-for-37 tear. He and his mates are here for that important trio of games. I wonder if the moment's going to get too big for tonight's young starter, Alex Manoah of the Jays. And I think that's one of the big reasons I'll go with Hernandez in this spot for $4,600. I also like Colton Wong for $4,400. He's been a model of consistency all year long, batting around 300 all the way and including the last 10 games, as well as facing starting pitcher Logan Webb. A platoon advantage goes his way tonight too. And then finally, I like a guy who I call a professional hitter, Michael Brantley, priced at only $3,000, the lowest of my preferred batters. He makes the grade because of his 12-for-35 streak ahead of a matchup against Bailey Ober of the Twins, who served up 9 homers and pitched to a very ordinary 4.57 ERA in his last 10 starts.
All right, let's bring things home with a quick look at the MLB bets available over on the DK Sportsbook. So what's your favorite bet in baseball tonight, Matt?
I've been kind of looking at this trend, and I've mentioned it a couple of times recently, of bigger underdogs that are kind of out of the playoff hunt being undervalued. And we're actually seeing line movement today that supports this, which wasn't really the case over the last week or so, where the Twins opened at around plus 200 against the Astros for tonight's game. The line's down to plus 165. There's a similar effect for the Pirates going into Cincinnati against a Reds team that is playing for a lot right now. And the Pirates are playing for virtually nothing, but still against Wade Miley, the line has moved towards the Pirates. So those are pretty telling. And I think the spot where you can still get some value, which hasn't moved yet, is the Diamondbacks going into San Diego against the Padres. That line's still at plus 185. Without Fernando Tatis Jr., this just isn't that good of a Padres offense. And I think that this line should just probably be closer than it is. So this is just a trend to look at, I think, over the long haul, at least until September starts. But yeah, if I have to pick a bet for tonight, I think my favorite spot there is Arizona.
All right, Paul, what's your favorite bet in baseball tonight?
I'm going to go to the other side of that matchup. I've been hammering the run line, the alternate run line totals lately and doing very well, taking the over on a few of them. And so I'll go with the Padres offense, even though they're missing their big gun, to have a big night against the lowly D-backs, and hit the over in the alternate line at 9.5 for plus 130. The control issues that have played Arizona starter Caleb Smith will be a big factor here. And I touched on the Jays Red Sox matchup. Tonight, I expect offense to rule the day, despite the fact they've got 2 pretty good starters going. I'm seeing the over of 11.5 as an easy win at plus 200.
Erik, take us home. What's your favorite bet in baseball tonight?
I'm going to go with one of the only bigger underdogs that hasn't been touched on yet, and that's the Angels at plus 175 over the Dodgers. Yes, the Angels would already be underdogs, and they're banged up. Obviously, Trout's been out for forever, it seems like, and Anthony Rendon just had season-ending surgery. But this is all about how much I like Patrick Sandoval. I think he's on a really impressive run since the start of June. In 9 starts, has a 3.21 ERA, but even more excitingly, a 31.1% strikeout rate combined with a 51.9% ground ball rate. If you look since 2002, which was the first year that we have ground ball rate data available, the only players to finish a full season with a strikeout rate north of 30% and a ground ball rate north of 50% are Clayton Kershaw in 2014 and Clayton Kershaw in 2015. Sandoval is walking far more guys than Kershaw did those years, but that's some pretty impressive company to be in. And I think there's every reason to believe that run will continue. And I think will give the Angels a chance at an upset against David Price, who I think I touched on earlier, is fine, but nothing scary at all at this point in his career. I agree that the Angels should be underdogs, but I don't think they should ever be plus 175 with Sandoval on the mound the way he's been pitching for a couple months now.